All right. So yeah, as Alina said, I will be talking tonight about how best to discover requirements from the team perspective and use a really great technique that is common in behavior-driven development or BDD in order to do that. As Alina said, I am located in Virginia, just actually outside of DC in Northern Virginia. I live in Fairfax. And I've been doing Agile for a long time. I started with XP or Extreme Programming and tend to focus on Agile engineering disciplines and practices. One of my favorites is behavior-driven development or BDD, and I often can be found helping teams adopt it and get better and better at it. So that's a little bit about me. I'll be talking for a bit through this to explain to you this particular technique called example mapping. If you have questions, I do encourage conversation. I love talking about this. I love answering questions. And I know that even though this might seem like a simple topic, there are, lots of devils in the details and lots of nuances that can get a little interesting at times. So yeah, feel free to leave comments in the chat, and maybe I'm sure Alina will be monitoring that and others, and can make me aware of things that are going on. If there are some interesting questions that come up, we'll talk through those. So let's start with this. Just take about a minute and look at this picture that's on the left-hand side of your screen. And I'd love to hear from any of you what it is that this picture looks like, what this team is doing, how they're working. Any thoughts at all?
That looks suspiciously like a waterfall process.
It does.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's probably the most common description I hear of this picture.
Everyone sits in their own corner. They're like all in different corners.
Yeah, and honestly, I've known many Agile teams that look a lot like this, where you have a business owner, product owner, an analyst kind of working together in their own corner. And then they have conversations, maybe separate conversations with a developer and a tester. And those developers and testers go on to their separate corners and work on their own for a while. And then eventually things kind of come together, and maybe the customer gets what they want and maybe they don't. Sometimes it's a matter of luck and chance whether that team actually builds the right thing.
And maybe just as a side comment, the user interface designer and the whole design discipline is kind of missing, because the business analysts usually don't deliver designs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there could be many perspectives that are missing from this conversation. Precisely. And sometimes it might even be some sort of an architect and that kind of design who's also missing from this. So then, what does this picture make you think? What's going on here instead?
Complexity is a picture.
Could be complexity.
Well, we've
got a lot more going on.
We've centralized everyone working from common understanding.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was looking for. Very nice, Ron. So rather than having everyone go off into their separate corners, as we were discussing in this first picture, there's really a lot more collaboration going on here, where you do have your business owner who has an idea, and then discusses it in the same conversation with testers and developers and maybe some other perspectives too. Maybe there's a UI designer, an architect, or someone important like that who needs to be included in the conversation. This common understanding from this conversation then leads to productive work outside of that, a common understanding of what the rules and examples are, and a much better chance that we've built the right thing and have something that can satisfy the customer. And that's really precisely what we're going for here when we go into behavior-driven development. Okay, so what is behavior-driven development?
George,
Yeah.
there was one new icon there, which is number 5.
Ah, yes. So what we want to make sure, yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. What we want to have as an output from these conversations is some sort of structured common language specification. And what is being shown in this part of the picture here is the potential, at least, for some good, high quality automated tests that are part of these specifications. We'll be getting into that in a moment, but that is a really important part of this picture. So thanks for bringing that up. I don't know how many of you are familiar already with behavior-driven development, but that is precisely what we're going to be talking about tonight. A pretty common and good definition of BDD is that it is collaboration and conversation to discover essential requirements and identify uncertainty using rules and examples expressed in a common language to build a shared understanding and to deliver software that matters, which is quite a mouthful. I was wondering if there are any particular words or phrases here that really seem to be of high value to you. Which ones resonate with you the most?
I like dealing with the uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that is a big one.
Yeah.
And I think where it probably brings so much value when we're talking about BDD is, I think a lot of times, whether you're doing waterfall or just kind of usual agile, a lot of times stories get presented to teams, and there's not a huge effort to identify that uncertainty, uncover those things that might be outside of the story that gets presented to the team at some sort of a refinement session. So yeah, that's a key one. Of course, the biggest ones here are up front. There's collaboration and conversation. I know y'all are seasoned agilists, so you're no doubt familiar with the 3 C's of a user story, and that user stories are, I guess that's the seasoning, very nice. The 3 C's include a contract for a conversation, right? So we want to make sure that that conversation happens. At BDD, it's at the heart of that effort. And the rules and examples will be a large part of what we're talking about tonight. The common language, doesn't have to be English or Spanish or whatever. The main aspect of that is that we want to make sure that common language is really bridging a communication gap within your team, and that we don't have developers who come to the table speaking only techno speak and business folks only speaking business speak. We want to have something that everyone can understand, and through behavior-driven development and talking through the rules and examples, that's really where we find that common language, so that we do get that early shared understanding of needs and constant feedback that can really enhance and improve quality in the product that we're going to deliver. Okay, truly delivering software that matters. All right, so the BDD process itself, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it really starts with discovery, making sure that that conversation happens. We want to make sure that we bring together a number of different perspectives to this conversation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the three amigos, the terminology of the three amigos.
Which three amigos? Actually, there's multiples of those out there.
Yeah, well, I mean,
So,
go
yeah,
ahead.
Marty Kagan's three amigos.
I'm thinking more of Bob Payne's and George Dinwiddie's three amigos, but it might be
Yeah,
the
see,
same.
there are multiples out there.
Yeah. Well, what is the one you're familiar with?
Yeah, well, Marty Kagan talks about the need for a tech lead, a design lead, and a product lead working as a three-legged stool.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially the idea here. The three perspectives that I often refer to as business, development, and testing. If there are other,
that's a different set. So yes.
yeah, but I mean, what I often say is that it should be at least those three perspectives. If other perspectives are necessary, then bring them along as well. So if it happens to be a UI specialist or some other design specialist, then by all means, whoever can further the conversation. The conversation is really at the heart of the matter, and bringing those multiple perspectives is of the utmost importance. A lot of times what happens, and I see on a lot of teams that aren't practicing BDD, is that it'll start with someone from business, whether it's an analyst or the product owner themselves, who will come together with an almost fully baked story, maybe with already written out given when then scenarios. And then the team is asked to refine something that is, mostly there in a sense. But what we want in BDD is to have a product owner and analyst, someone from the business perspective, have some idea of what the high level acceptance criteria are, what some of the rules are going to be, and then come to this three amigos to discover more, to uncover that uncertainty, have some conversations to understand whether a story is valuable from the business perspective, feasible from the development perspective, and testable from the tester's perspective. And that conversation will really get to a better understanding of what the acceptance criteria are overall, so that then we can start formulating some good, potentially executable specifications. And so that would be the second step in the BDD process, is the formulation of some executable specifications, which are often in the form of given when then Gherkin scenarios. GWTs is what some people would refer to them as. How many of you are familiar with the Gherkin syntax at all? Given when then, okay. See, yeah, sort of. And so the idea here, that's basically a common syntax that is understandable by business development test in order to really have some good acceptance criteria that can be potentially automated, executable specifications. The BDD process, by the way, does not stipulate that automation is absolutely 100% required, but of course we're not going to discourage automation, and the better these scenarios are, typically the more automatable they are, and the more we automate these tests, the better off we'll be in the long run as a team, because we won't have to repeat every one of those manual tests over and over again every time you need to execute things. So that'll lead to automated acceptance tests, potentially some other automated tests like unit tests, integration tests, a bunch of tests. That's for the team to decide. And then once all of those are run, we can validate it and have some really good feedback and learning back into the process. One thing I want to emphasize, and I said it at the beginning of this, is that we do not expect in the BDD process for things to be coming down from the mountaintop from product with requirements that are fully detailed and rather exhaustive. Instead, we want the team of these three amigos to discover those requirements together, to forge that common understanding. And what I'll be going into in a little bit is a rather low fidelity approach to developing that acceptance criteria and coming to that shared understanding together. Are there any questions so far about this process? I see there's some things in the chat.
I mean, earlier Logan noticed that there was no more documentation. The documentation person lost their job, and
I guess that all depends on the team that you're on. Typically in agile teams, we have some sort of a coach and a product owner, and then especially in Scrum, we'll say that everyone else is a team member, and we don't necessarily specify that someone's a developer, someone's a tester, or someone's a tech writer, or UI, or whatever. We want to make sure that there's some great collaboration, and if you need to wear multiple hats, then that's really important. I guess I should probably point out here too that when you are assembling your three amigos, you don't necessarily have to have a test specialist and a developer specialist filling the roles of those perspectives. You just need to have those perspectives present, and if someone is present who really does a great job of representing the test perspective, whether they are identified as a tester or not, then that's really up to the team. If your team values the work of a tech writer, and that's important to moving things forward, I'm not going to be eliminating that job, and maybe part of what your acceptance criteria will be is producing some great documentation. It's up to you. But the other aspect of this, which is probably salient to the question, is that these given when-thens do go a long way to providing some living documentation in the team's repository. And I tend to think that in fact, I'll go out and say that 90% of all Gherkin scenarios that are out there in the industry are really poorly written, and there are probably some good writers out there that could help a team put some really good given when-thens together. So that means that your tech writer sticks around. That probably also means that your Gherkin scenarios will be improved because of it.
Can you give us an example of the Gherkinson, like how to use that structure?
Sure. I mean, it would probably be suitable for another rather expansive topic. I do actually have some stuff on this, and it is one of my pet peeves to see poorly written given when-thens. The idea is that in a given when-then, there's one thing that has to be at the top, and that is a good scenario description. So you should be able to articulate as a team what that scenario is going to prove. Sometimes I will see a scenario description that simply says test X, and that's incredibly insufficient. There aren't a whole lot of rules about what that scenario description should say, but it should be as descriptive as is necessary so that the next person who comes along and looks at it can understand what the point of it was. Because, you know, if it were to fail, that person needs to know how to fix it. The given is supposed to set up the test preconditions. So whatever data needs to be set up, whatever things need to be set up to run the test, then that's what's in your given. Your when is the specific action that is under test. If I see a when that has multiple lines, I tend to think that that's a poorly written Gherkin scenario right off the bat. And actually, most of the time I see some things piled into the when that should probably be in the given, in the data preconditions. And then the then is what the output of that action is supposed to be. In a nutshell, that's what a given when then scenario should communicate.
So given that I'm logged in, when I hit the generate report button, I should get a multi-page report or something.
Something like that. I will add that I prefer that implementation details like clicking on a button should probably be left out, because this should be from a customer's perspective, and really they'll probably be submitting something rather than clicking on a button. Users tend not to care about that. And then also it can be nice for them to be rather implementation agnostic. So if you need the scenario to apply to a service instead of a web user interface, then there's some multi-purpose to that. It really is explaining the expected behavior that we want to have in our scenario. Okay. Clear enough?
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure. All right, so let's talk about and what we'll be talking about tonight when we're going through example mapping is really only this part of the BDD process, which is the initial discovery and really coming up with a common understanding of what the acceptance criteria are. So the first thing is to have the conversation before writing code. Talked already about the three amigos and how important it is to have a shared understanding. Out of it, the three amigos should agree that whatever is there is ready to be implemented roughly. I mean, you have something that maybe there's still some refinement that has to be done by the rest of the team, but it's mostly there, mostly dev ready would meet your team's definition of ready for the most part. So what we want to do, though, is we want to talk about how important it is in BDD for us to talk through rules and examples in these conversations. And the example that we have over here on the right says, okay, first we have a user story, and it's about a shopping cart. We have a rule that is just an abstract description of how things should work. All right. And the rules, when we're talking about rules and examples, the rules are typically what you would expect your developers to code up. And the rule that you would see and it's actually a traditional requirement, is if a reader buys 3 books, then the cheapest of the 3 should be free. Right? So that's the rule. And then an example is something that is a concrete, some sort of actual scenario of things working as they should, what the expected behavior is. And in this one, you can see that I have 3 books in my cart. One is $10, one's $15, and one's $5. And at checkout, the total should be $26.50. I'll pause here and say, does something look kind of funny about this example?
Where do you mention the tax?
Right. And so I think implicit most of the time would be that maybe there's a story that's already been implemented that takes care of sales tax. And if we don't take into account that particular thing that's already been implemented, if we just write a scenario that says 10, 15, 5, cheapest is free, the total should be $25, we're going to write a failing test right off the bat. So what we want to do is have this conversation and say, what do you think of it? And the developer, or maybe a tester, would say, we need to make sure that the tax comes in, and oh, by the way, it should be $1.50. So make sure that your test scenario reflects that. Okay, so that's part of the power of this conversation, is getting the perspectives, people's history with a product, and making sure that they understand all of the things that go in there, so that the scenarios that emerge from this are good, working, executable scenarios. Okay. Important to also emphasize, rules are the abstract descriptions. They are what the programmers will be implementing. The examples are actual concrete scenarios. These are essentially your test cases. Okay. Any questions? All right.
Like,
So
this might it
yeah,
might be
go
a
ahead,
little too
Logan.
into the yeah, it might be a little too into the weeds, but thinking about maintainability, if this is automated, in the example with the tax, if the tax changes, are there then a whole slew of tests that have to change? Or do you clutter it up with, and given that the tax is X% in this jurisdiction, or is there some like third option I'm not seeing? And if that's too much detail for this stage of the talk, also feel free to skip.
I'll say really quickly that when automating these scenarios, most teams are using something like the Cucumber framework, which is, Gherkin is a part of that. And so there's some glue code that has to be written. And the glue code is really where things can be reused and repeated. And that's where you would have something like that tax in there. And so if the tax were to change, one would hope that the team has implemented that thing in such a way that you wouldn't have to change it in every single little place where it is. You change it in one place and all of your tests should be fixed. So that's roughly how that would go about.
So like it would regenerate the number 2650?
So no. Yeah, that's a really good point. We'll put a pin in that one. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. So now is to the heart of the matter of tonight's talk, and that is using this particular technique called example mapping as part of your BDD process to have that low fidelity conversation and use that to frame the conversation and understand what the heart of the matter is. So what we do is we start up at the top with a yellow orange sticky that is your user story. And then below that in blue stickies are your rules. And then the green stickies are your concrete examples that are used to illustrate the rules. And then pink or red or whatever are questions. Let's say that there's something that's unclear about it, then and maybe the person who's representing the business, or maybe there is a technical question that needs to be asked and probed, a little bit of analysis needs to happen. You might record those in these red or pink stickies for questions. Most of what you're going to see here are in the blue and the green, the rules and the examples. Again, the rules are your acceptance criteria and the greens are your acceptance scenarios. An example of this would look a lot like this. So if I had a story that said, I want to create some sort of password algorithm that's not easy to crack, some sort of a password validation algorithm. I would start out and say, okay, here are my rules. I must have, one of the rules is it has to have a minimum of 8 characters. And the second rule is alphanumeric with at least 1 special character. So abstract rules, acceptance criteria. Next come the examples in green. And what's important to also understand is we don't just want happy path, but we also want some negative scenarios. Those are important for going forward. And A happy path, of course, would be foobar gobble with zeros for those two O's and an exclamation point. There's one here that is not satisfying the minimum of 8 characters and also doesn't have a special character. But principally, we're noticing that there's 6 characters, so it's invalid, it's too short. Foobar gobble, I would also hasten to add, since it's a happy path scenario, it must satisfy both of the rules. It's not just there to satisfy this one. So that's an important thing to make note of. And then there are some questions. So is there a maximum length constraint? We might want to expand this story, or maybe the answer is no, there's no maximum length. You can make your passwords as long as you want, but the question needs to be asked nonetheless. And then there's also this interesting one. It's kind of what some of us might refer to as a Friends episode examples card, where it's the one where there's no number, no letter, and no special character. And one important thing to note is that because we want to emphasize that this is a low fidelity approach, the rules for how we formulate the examples on these example cards, we're not going to be too rigid about it. The idea is we want to make sure that everyone has an understanding. So, we don't necessarily have to document in here that there's no number and have a foobar gobble where the zeros are O's, right? Or a U. Or no letter. We can just say the one where there's no letter, no number, no special character, and everyone should be able to understand what that means. And it should fail the validation. That's the expected behavior, and that would lead to a passing test. So maybe there's another question. A developer says, shouldn't we require a mix of uppercase and lowercase? I mean, so far we just have lowercase. And someone says, well, what about this scenario? What about repeated characters? Often password validations will say that this is invalid. And so we would capture those, try to understand with the conversation with business, whether these are scenarios that we should capture, or maybe it leads to a different story. Okay, so as I said earlier, with the 3 amigos, the 3 perspectives of business, development, and testing, we should be able to discern by the end of this conversation that we have a story that is valuable, feasible, and testable. And so here's some combination of all the things that we covered in that previous slide. Now we have something that's about the mixed case. We adjusted the example so that this one has an uppercase. This one's now invalid, even though it was valid in the original one. We take into account the repeating pattern, and we've even come up with a new story about some sort of password reuse policy, okay? So, having gone through all that, what would you think it would mean if there is an example map that has a whole lot of red cards?
I think that means that we're doing a password change scenario. There are no end of questions on that one.
Well, I mean, it would generally indicate that we don't really know enough about this story, and we have to go back to the business, or maybe there's some deeper analysis that has to happen, because this 3 amigos session, there were more questions than answers. That's why we would probably want to come back to this at a later date. How about if there are a lot of blue cards being the rules? What would that mean to you?
Also, that it's a password change scenario.
Or multiple stories.
Oh, there
Trying to
you go.
overload a single story.
Yeah, and I think one of the most powerful aspects of this is that by visualizing it, we can get a better idea of what the total level of effort is going to be on this, in a very powerful way. And by seeing how rules might be separated from one another, come about with a way of having better, smaller stories, right? How about lots of green cards? And the green cards are the examples, and really speak to the test scenarios.
Ambiguity? No? If there are too many examples?
Got too much into the weeds?
I don't know if it's too much into the weeds. And I think actually, rather than being ambiguous, we probably did a really nice job of thinking through all of the happy path scenarios and a lot of negative tests as well, and maybe came up with a bunch. So I think if we see lots of green cards, that's an indication that the testing effort on the story is going to be immense. And it's not uncommon that there might be a single line change in your code, and the developers will say, oh, this is only a couple of story points. We don't really need to spend a lot of effort on this. But by visualizing all the scenarios that'll have to be tested, we might understand that actually this is a pretty sizable story after all, because of all the testing. And maybe there's a way to also split the story by understanding that if we can redefine the rules in such a way that we can have simpler test scenarios, then maybe we can find a way to split out the test effort by finding better ways to define the rules. That's a potential. I mean, at the very least, we'll see that it's a big story testing wise, which a lot of teams don't have a good appreciation of. Okay. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like Volker's observation that we could break it into multiple stories, which we do outside of BDD. Here we are in BDD, and we've got multiple stories which are multiple criteria for the same epic. Let's call it an epic. Changing a password probably is an epic. With the number of rules that we've got here. Does BDD have so my question is, does BDD have a way of aggregating the tests for an epic from having broken it into multiple gherkin stories? I'm not sure exactly what terminology to use here, but
so the gherkin syntax definitely has a way of, and through Cucumber and a lot of the tools that teams will use to automate these test scenarios, there is a way to have your test scenario identified with a particular story, so that you can say, map this particular test scenario to this particular story. So as you break things out and split them out according to rules and examples, there is a way to understand how those things then bubble back up to one another. That is clear.
Well, but the epic from a user standpoint is a single thing, right? I'm proposing a password. There are multiple stories that are now dealing with that proposed password. That we need an aggregated test suite, as opposed to it's like there's the user task has it's a one-to-many now.
Right. I don't think that there's anything different in BDD that you would have in the rest of Agile.
Okay.
I mean, certainly as you go through any number of stories, if you were to notice that things are big, there are a lot of different patterns for splitting them up. BDD offers a really handy way to visualize one of the possible patterns that you could use for splitting one big story into multiple smaller stories. And that's really along the rules.
Well, so what I'm thinking is that if it automates the testing, which is goodness,
Mhm.
but we have multiple stories. That first automated test says, "Oh, foobar gobble bang is passes,"
Mhm.
and so what I think you've got is a Unix pipe from one test to the next that it has to pass all of those a whole series of tests before
Right.
it's a pass so far into the next test.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, as we write more and more automated tests, we would continuously run them as a team. We commit our code, and we should be able to, if even one of them fails, then that should give the team a hard stop to make sure that they understand how they're going to fix it before they proceed. So, you would
Yeah,
hope
well,
that all of these
it's not-
scenarios pass.
Yeah, it's not the test failing, it's the user. It's the ultimate generated code needs to fail when the user puts in foobar gobble bang.
There might be a slight misunderstanding, and maybe we'll get to this in a little bit, but I mean, the scenarios that we would be writing as part of this would not have any kind of external user input. We would automate that foobar gobble bang is one of the cases that we're going to be testing for.
Right, but the users, but we want a set of tests that ultimately either validate or invalidate whatever users put in, which is an infinite number of possibilities.
Yeah, but they would be based on some rules that we would be coming up with here. Maybe as we go through and do some example mapping ourselves, maybe it'll be a little bit clearer. So let's see. All right, so I want to do one of the things that I think is important is understanding the difference between rules and examples. And so I've set up something in Mentimeter. So if through your phone or laptop or whatever, you go to menti.com and use this code, 84488665. And as you're putting that in, I'm going to go and share my screen that is in Mentimeter. And you'll see that code up at the top too. So if you have a hard time with that, you'll see it soon.
The quiz is not open, George.
I'll open
Please
it.
wait for the presenter to activate it.
Yes. Okay. Give me just a moment and get over there.
Got it.
See people coming in. Just 4 simple questions that I've put together. Wait for a couple more people to come in. And if you are trying to get in, the code is 84488665. And
I've also put it in the chat if you want to copy paste.
Excellent. Thank you, Volker. I'm going to hit enter to start the quiz. All right, so answer fast to get more points. Sales tax of 5% is added to the purchase amount. Is that a rule or an example? Okay, so yeah, most of you got that right. It is a rule. It's abstract acceptance criteria. Essentially whatever a developer would code up, right? Very nice. Next. For an item purchased for $12, sales tax of 60 cents is added for a total of $12.60. Is that a rule or an example? Oh, that was fast. All right, very good. Everyone got that right. Excellent. You know, they're good students. All right, next. If an avid reader buys 4 books in 1 month, the cheapest of the 4 should be free. Rule or example? Very quick. All right. Very nice. Everyone did well on that one as well. So that is a rule. It might seem like this is a concrete example of an avid reader. The adjectives sometimes will trip people up, but y'all are obviously a much more clever audience than we often have. All right, and the last one. The one where the customer forgot their credit card. Is that a rule or an example? Okay, so most of you are right. It is an example. It might not sound super specific, so it is kind of confusing in that sense. But as I mentioned earlier, it's nice to kind of have a low fidelity approach to these so that everyone has an understanding, and so you can get a little non-specific on some of these scenarios and examples. But most of you got that right. All right, so this is what the leaderboard looks like. And all right, who came in first? Very nice, Volker. You're the big winner. I don't have a prize for you, but you can at least, you have bragging rights. Yeah, and you can pat yourself on the back. Very nice. Okay. So the next thing to do is want to now move on to, sure. I want to go on to Mural. I'm going to share my PowerPoint for just a second. Make sure I'm in the right place. Here we go. And all right. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go over to Mural, and we're going to be working on some fictional banking app. There'll be 4 stories that you can choose from. You can choose to either work on a story related to depositing funds, withdrawing funds from your account, transferring funds between primary and savings, or finally setting up a savings account to automatically cover overdrafts from your checking account. When you go into, we'll go into breakout rooms, and I'll show you the mural that will help us through this in a second. But once you're in your breakout room, I want you to pick a facilitator, pick a story from among these 4, and make sure your group represents those multiple perspectives, at least business, development, and testing, and then create your example map. Blue stickies for rules, green stickies for examples, and pink for the questions. I'm going to go over to Mural, and Volker and Lena can share the link to that so that you'll be able to get in there in a moment. Okay, yeah, here it is. So what I have, and for those of you who are familiar with Mural, this should be very easy for you to navigate through, but I do have an outline set up so that once we understand which breakout we're in, you can go to breakout 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. I don't think we'll probably, with 17 people total, probably won't need all 6 of these. Probably 3 will do, I would guess. But very simple. Step one is choose a story, and each one of you can choose from any of these four. It doesn't matter to me if you repeat across the breakout rooms. It's really up to you to decide which one is the story you want to work on. And then I have kind of a rough template here. Blue stickies for your rules, green for the examples, pink for the questions. You can have as many or as few of them as you want. It's up to you as a team to figure out how many rules you need and how many examples you need to illustrate them. If you need to create more, you can copy and paste them using whatever copy and paste mechanism you want, or you can double click to create another one. Whichever one works for you, it's up to you. Okay. Any questions before we go to the breakout? Okay. Volker, have you been able to set up some breakout rooms and give us direction?
Breakout rooms are set. Set 3 breakout rooms. So as you enter, pay attention which number your group is working on, or which breakout room you're in, and that sends you to that part in the mural board. And if you haven't made it to the mural yet, it is in the chat, just 1 or 2 steps above the people who said that they need to sign off early. And we maybe want to have a little sense for timing, like 15 minutes for the session.
Yeah, 15 minutes, and I'll put that in the timer right here.
All right. All right. So with that, let's have fun and play around a bit.
Did y'all enjoy that?
Well, moving money between accounts is way easier than changing passwords.
And it can be very satisfying to, especially when you're playing with someone else's money, I guess, right?
Or playing with the rules that you want around your money.
Sure.
The hell with Bank of America.
Sure. Well, interesting. It looks like even though we said anyone, y'all could choose any one of the stories, we had 3 different stories chosen. So withdraw, transfer, and deposit. I know that I was in breakout 3 and we were guilty of initially putting some rules over in breakout 1. I'm sure, Volker, you probably noticed that.
I was constantly asking, like, we're withdrawing money, we're not depositing.
Inter-team sabotage.
Yeah. All right. So we have had time to put together some rules and examples. Anyone for breakout 1 want to talk about the example map you put together, and were there any interesting insights that y'all came across while you were doing this? Anyone can talk.
Certainly, it was useful to start going back and forth between some examples. And then as soon as we sort of ran into like, oh, what if I'm in Mexico City trying to get some money off my Bank of America account, and the exchange rates, and how does that start to, like, suddenly we had a level of complexity that wasn't obvious when we started.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as a user story, this is a bit broad, withdrawing funds. That's definitely more at the epic level, right? But yeah, I see though that what y'all put together, the rules are very much rules, and your examples are concrete examples. Is there some sort of a note here?
This was, how to show that it would fail. We didn't have in your example, you had some happy and unhappy faces, and we hadn't really come up with a visual signal, like this is a rule, this is the test for a fail, and this is the test for that has to go green, you know. So minor detail.
Yeah. I do like, I'll have these nice pink stickies about maximum, what if it's overdrawn, what are the disclosure rules around currency exchange. Those are really cool. And often I see teams also use these to really better define the boundaries of the story, something beyond, it's just some clarification too. That can be handy. All right, breakout 2. Y'all chose to transfer funds. Okay, I'll move that blue one. That's definitely very rule associated up a little bit. Oops, didn't want to do that. Okay, so withdrawn amount matches, can't transfer more funds, choice of immediate transfer or scheduled transfer, can't schedule in the past, have to be logged into your account. Very rule-like, yeah. So first account is debited, second account is credited. Yeah, these look like really good examples. Okay. Questions about only how many transfers per month. Very nice. Any interesting insights that y'all had along the way?
Seems
What was that?
seems straightforward.
Okay, yeah.
And there were just 2 of us, so I don't know how much we got the full perspectives, and it was more of
Yeah.
to some extent, more of a customer perspective.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you were one perspective short of the 3 amigos. Although, sometimes if you have one person representing multiple perspectives, then you can get up to your 3 amigos with less than 3 people. But it is, the more the merrier on some of those things. Okay. I know some people had to leave a little earlier. We had a few people here in breakout 3. We were talking about depositing. I'll hand it over to those who put the example map together. Was there anything that was discussed here that was interesting to y'all?
Maybe I can go.
Yeah, go ahead, JD.
Yeah, so first, it was like I was not sure whether what type of deposit, and then someone said, okay, we need to, there is a direct deposit has different rules than depositing a check. So we added that. And then, of course, there was this AML rules, which was getting triggered at 10,000. So there was no clarity whether it's at 10,000 above or below. So we put some rules around that.
Yeah.
And gave them examples.
Very nice. Yeah. So some concrete examples around that and worked through a couple of the rules. So
and
very
then
nice.
The question for clarification, how frequent or the number of transactions.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. All right. So now all of you have been through some example mapping, and pretty much at the end of all of this, I do want to wrap up with a couple of things. So, given that all of this is really about collaboration and teamwork, I have some quotations that I think provide some valuable insights. One is from Oliver Wendell Holmes. Many ideas grow better when transplanted into another mind than the one where they sprang up. Really about ideas getting better when you have more people to talk about them. And then from Lizzo, one of my favorite celebrities right now, she said, if I'm shining, everybody gonna shine. So it's not all about just one person doing the work, but the collaboration across the team and teamwork making the dream work, as it were. So some of my favorite nuggets there. There are some really great things to read in order a little bit more. There is an introduction to example mapping, and Matt Wynn's whole treatment of that. You can read a bit more about behavior-driven development, BDD, and some more about example mapping.
Would it be possible to copy them into the chat?
Yeah, and I'll also, with Lena's help, I think I'll just save this as a PDF and the example map itself from Mural, and we can also share that with everyone who was present today.
Just
If
paste
that's-
it, Volker.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Volker. How about that?
I just pasted it.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Ron, and sure, George, we can do that.
Okay. I think I had a typo in one of those URLs I just noticed. Sorry about that, but I'll fix that too before I send that out. Anyhow, if you need to contact me, here's my email. I'm available on LinkedIn, of course, and I work for LitheSpeed, an agile coaching and consulting company out here in the District, Maryland, Virginia area, DMV, as it were. Here's a QR code to a meetup that we host. So if you want to join us at one of our meetups, we'd love to see you. That is it for my example mapping. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll hand it back over to you, Alina. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I'll stop the recording and I'll launch our poll.